The wind howled across the high plains like a wounded animal. It clawed at the frozen earth, dragging white dust into the air until sky and ground became one color, the color of death. The mountains, far off, stood like the backs of sleeping gods beneath a storm that promised no mercy. Jake Hollister pulled his coat tighter around his shoulders and squinted against the blowing snow. His horse, Dusty, trudged along the narrow trail, hooves crunching in rhythm. The storm had rolled in faster than he'd expected. He'd gone north for fence wire and winter feed from the trading post 2 days ago, but now the weather had turned ugly. The kind of ugly that buried cattle and men alike. He wasn't far from his cabin, maybe an hour if the storm didn't thicken. But there was something in the air, something uneasy. The kind of silence that came before a coyote's cry, before a rifle crack. He could feel it in his bones. That's when he saw the dark shape lying beside the creek bed. Jake reined in Dusty. Through the swirl of snow, he made out a figure, a man, half covered in frost, his chest rising faintly. Next to him, a small bundle, still and silent. Jake jumped off his horse and trudged through the drifts, his boots sinking deep. The man's hair was black as midnight, braided and streaked with ice. His skin was the dark copper of the Apache. Blood had soaked through his shirt, freezing into dark patches. He was dying. The bundle stirred. A child. A boy no older than 6, wrapped in a tattered blanket. His big brown eyes opened, wide and lost. The Apache man coughed weakly, eyes fluttering open. He saw Jake and tried to reach for something under his coat, but Jake lifted a hand. "Easy there, friend," Jake said softly, kneeling down. "Ain't here to harm you." The man blinked, struggling for breath. His English came rough and broken. "You, white man. You help." Jake nodded. "If I can." The man pulled something from his coat, a small leather pouch on a string, worn smooth from years of touch. He pressed it into Jake's hands. "My son," he rasped. "His name. Chayton. No tribe now. No kin. Take him. Raise him. Make him a man." Jake froze, feeling the weight of that tiny hand clutching his sleeve. The boy looked up at him, not crying, not speaking, just watching with eyes too calm for a child. "I ain't no father," Jake said softly. "I got a ranch. Hard winters. Ain't no place for." The Apache's grip tightened with surprising strength. Good boy. He live if you take. Promise me." The man coughed again, harder this time. Blood stained the snow. Jake looked around helplessly, but there was no one for miles. No medicine. No time. "I promise," Jake said quietly. The Apache nodded once, his eyes closing. The wind screamed through the canyon, covering his body in white as if the land itself was claiming him. Jake stood in the storm, the boy clutching his leg, the pouch cold in his hand. For a long while, neither moved. Then Jake took a breath, knelt down, and scooped the boy up into his arms. "Come on, Chayton," he murmured. "Let's get you warm." The cabin came into view through the wall of snow, a low, weathered structure tucked against the pines. The windows glowed faintly from the fire he'd left burning in the stove. Jake pushed through the door, stamping snow from his boots. He set the boy near the fire and stripped off his wet coat. The child didn't speak a word, just sat there watching the flames as if they were alive. Jake heated water, tore old cloth for bandages, though there was no wound to tend except the one in the boy's heart. He found an old wool shirt, small enough to make do, and gave him a tin cup of warm milk. "You got a name, son?" Jake asked gently. The boy's lips moved. "Chayton." Jake nodded. "That's a good name. Means hawk, don't it?" The boy just stared, then nodded faintly. Jake sat back, rubbing his beard. He wasn't good with kids. He wasn't good with much of anything besides horses and dirt. But he'd made a promise. And Jake Hollister was a man who didn't break his word, not even to a dying stranger. Outside, the wind howled like ghosts circling the cabin. The fire popped. Jake poured himself some coffee and studied the boy again. He was small but sturdy. His eyes were sharp, too sharp for his age. "You can stay here a while," Jake said finally. "Till spring, maybe. Then we'll see." The boy didn't reply. He just stared into the fire, quiet as snowfall. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that Apache father's face, pale under the moon, his voice echoing, "Promise me." He got up before dawn and walked outside. The storm had passed. The land was covered in pure white, the kind of silence that only follows death. He went back to the creek and found the body half buried in snow. He dug a shallow grave beside a pine tree, marking it with a simple cross of twigs. He didn't know the man's name, only that he'd trusted him with something precious. When Jake returned, the boy was awake, sitting at the table, the pouch from his father in his hands. Jake poured him a little oatmeal and sat across from him. "You know what's in there?" The boy shook his head. Jake untied it gently. Inside was a small carved feather made from bone, and a piece of cloth with a single word burned into it: family. Jake swallowed hard. "Guess your pa meant what he said." He tied the pouch back up and handed it to the boy. "You keep that. Always." Chayton held it close to his chest and whispered something in Apache Jake didn't understand. But he understood the tone: grief, respect, love. Jake sighed, rubbing his face. "All right then," he muttered. "Family it is." And from that day, the cabin no longer held just one voice but two. One quiet, one rough, bound together by a promise made in the snow. That was the beginning. Jake taught Chayton how to split logs, feed the horses, mend tack, and ride bareback through the snowfields. The boy didn't talk much, but he learned fast. He moved with the silence of a hunter, his eyes always watching, listening. Some nights, Jake caught him standing outside, staring up at the stars, whispering words to someone only he could hear. Jake let him be. The boy had lost enough. Winter deepened. The nights grew colder, the wind meaner. Coyotes prowled close to the cabin, and food got scarce. But somehow, having Chayton there made the place feel alive again. Jake started leaving an extra plate on the table, talking aloud even when the boy didn't answer. He began to feel like maybe this was what that Apache meant: make him a man. But life in the West didn't stay peaceful for long. One morning, smoke rose from the East Ridge. Not from lightning or campfires. This was black smoke, thick and heavy. Trouble kind of smoke. Jake felt his stomach drop. "Stay inside," he told Chayton, grabbing his rifle. The boy looked at him silently, eyes hard. "Bad men." Jake hesitated, then nodded. "Maybe." He rode out through the snow, rifle slung across his shoulder, unaware that this was the day everything would change again, for both of them. By the time Jake reached the ridge, the snow had turned pink under the rising sun. The smoke came from the valley beyond, where the old trading route cut through the pines. He dismounted and crouched low, rifle ready. Through the trees, he saw what remained of a small wagon. Burned. Blackened. The oxen still hitched, frozen stiff. 3 bodies lay nearby, one face down in the snow, the others half covered by ash and soot. Jake's jaw tightened. He knew what this was: bandits. Likely the same bunch that had been haunting the trails for weeks, preying on travelers too poor to defend themselves. He searched the scene. The wagon had been looted clean. Gold, furs, anything worth taking was gone. But one thing stood out: footprints. 5, maybe 6 riders, heading west toward the foothills. Jake cursed under his breath. He didn't want trouble. He just wanted to keep his ranch alive through another winter. But if those men got bold enough to raid near his land, it wouldn't be long before they found his cabin. And Chayton. He mounted Dusty again and turned back toward home, riding hard through the snow. When he burst through the cabin door, the boy was there, waiting by the fire. He looked up, calm as always. "Smoke," Chayton said simply. Jake nodded. "Outlaws. 6 of 'em, maybe more. We're gonna have to be careful." The boy tilted his head. "They come here." Jake hesitated. "They might." He walked to the gun rack, checking the rifle and shotgun. He wasn't much for violence unless forced into it, but the West didn't care what a man preferred. Sooner or later, trouble came knocking. Chayton watched in silence, then reached into his pouch. He took out the small bone feather, kissed it, and whispered something again. Jake looked over. "What's that mean, son?" Chayton met his eyes. "It mean, fight with spirit." Jake half smiled. "Guess we might have to." 3 days passed. Snow came heavier, the kind that turned trails to rivers of white. Jake tried to keep busy, fixing the roof, chopping firewood, teaching Chayton how to set traps for rabbits. But the feeling of danger didn't fade. It hung in the air, cold and invisible. Then, on the 4th night, it came. Jake woke to the faint sound of hooves. Not close, but near enough. The cabin walls trembled under the weight of the wind, but he heard it, horses moving slow, deliberate. He sat up, grabbed his rifle, and motioned for Chayton to stay quiet. The boy nodded, slipping out of bed like a shadow. Jake crept to the window. In the distance, flickers of light, torches, moving down the slope. "Damn it," he whispered. He pulled Chayton close. "Listen to me. If I tell you to run, you take the back trail to the creek. Follow it north till you hit the old mine road. You don't stop for nothing, you hear?" The boy frowned. "No run. I fight." Jake gritted his teeth. "You're just a kid." Chayton's eyes hardened. "My father fight when dying. I fight when living." Jake stared at him for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "All right. But you stay behind me." The first man appeared out of the snow like a ghost, rifle slung, hat pulled low. Behind him, 5 others followed, faces hidden under scarves. They stopped a few yards from the cabin. The leader called out, his voice muffled. "We don't want no fight, mister. Just need some supplies. Maybe food. Maybe gold if you got it." Jake stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand. "Ain't got much of either. You best keep riding." The man chuckled. "Funny thing, rancher. Every time we hear that, turns out folks got plenty." He motioned, and 2 riders began to circle the cabin. Jake cocked the rifle. "You take one more step, I drop you where you stand." For a second, silence. Then, laughter. The man raised his gun. Jake fired first. The crack split the night, echoing through the valley. The leader toppled backward, snow blooming red beneath him. Chaos erupted. Bullets tore through the air. The horses screamed. Jake ducked behind the porch post, firing again. One of the bandits dropped, another fled toward the trees. Chayton darted inside, grabbed the shotgun like Jake had shown him, and fired through the window. The blast shattered the night. A man screamed. Jake glanced back. "Good boy." But before he could reload, a figure appeared behind the cabin, creeping toward the door. Jake saw the glint of a knife. Too late. The door burst open. The outlaw lunged. Jake swung the rifle like a club, catching him in the jaw. They struggled in the snow, grunting, fists flying. Jake landed a hard punch, but the man was strong, desperate. The knife slashed across Jake's arm, hot blood soaking through his sleeve. Then, a shout. Chayton stood at the doorway, eyes burning, shotgun trembling in his hands. "Let him go." The outlaw froze, sneering. "You ain't got the guts, kid." The gun roared. The man fell. Jake caught his breath, heart pounding. He looked at the boy, small, shaking, eyes wide but steady. "Hell," Jake whispered. "You sure as sin ain't no coward." The rest of the outlaws fled into the darkness, leaving their dead behind. The snow fell heavier, covering their tracks. Jake leaned against the porch post, bleeding but alive. Chayton came to his side, silent. Together, they watched the snow swallow the night. By morning, the bodies were gone, wolves or the cold had taken them. Jake burned what remained of the firewood to warm the cabin. His arm throbbed, but it wasn't bad enough to kill him. Chayton sat across from him, cleaning the shotgun with quiet precision. "You saved my hide," Jake said softly. Your pa would have been proud. The boy looked up. You my father now? Jake froze. The question hit harder than a bullet. He thought about it for a moment. I ain't your blood, son. But I reckon, yeah, I'm family. The boy smiled for the first time since the day they met. From then on, something changed between them. Jake no longer saw a lost Apache boy, he saw a son. And Chayton no longer called him Mister. He called him Pa. The winter dragged on. Together, they fixed fences, hunted deer, and patched the roof. The cabin filled with laughter now. Quiet, rough laughter, but real. Jake began teaching Chayton English better. In return, the boy taught him Apache words, Shurji for father, Gowi for coffee, Alhi for boy. They became a family, bound not by blood, but by survival. But peace, like snow in the desert, never lasted. Late one evening, a letter arrived from the sheriff in town. It came by a trader who braved the storm. The message was short. Bandit survivors seen heading back this way. Revenge likely. Stay ready. Jake lowered the letter, eyes cold. Chayton watched him silently, then said, They come again? Jake nodded. Looks that way. The boy's small hand tightened around the bone feather. Then we fight again. Jake gave a grim smile. Yeah, son. We fight again. Outside, the wind picked up, howling across the plains, as if the spirits themselves were warning them of what was coming next. The wind carried a low hum that night, like the sound of drums too far away to name. The plains stretched endless and white beneath the moonlight, broken only by the cabin's lonely shape, half buried under snowdrifts. Jake Hollister sat by the fire, sharpening his knife. His wounded arm ached, but he didn't show it. Across from him, Chayton was cleaning the rifle, his face steady and quiet, a boy grown older by months of fear and frozen nights. Jake studied him in silence. There was something about the way the boy held himself now. Calm, strong, like his father had passed more than just blood into him. You know, Jake muttered, when this all started, I figured I'd just keep you safe till spring. Then you could decide where to go. Never thought you'd be the one keeping me alive. Chayton looked up, a small smile flickering. You teach. I learn. That make us same. Jake chuckled. Maybe it does. But beneath that laugh, he knew what was coming. The sheriff's warning wasn't just smoke. Outlaws in the West didn't forget humiliation, especially not the kind dealt by a rancher and a kid. And when they came back, they'd come mean. By morning, Jake had the cabin ready like a fortress. He set up shooting positions near the windows, piled logs and crates as cover, and packed snow along the walls to block wind and bullets. Chayton gathered cartridges, filled canteens, and laid out blankets near the stove. They didn't talk much that day. The silence between them was thick, like both knew what the other was thinking, that this might be the last time they'd share a sunrise. Jake took the boy outside after lunch. The air bit like knives, the snow squealing under their boots. They walked to the ridge, overlooking the valley where smoke once rose weeks ago. You ever think about your father? Jake asked. Chayton nodded slowly. Every night. He watched from sky. Maybe he proud. He'd be proud, Jake said firmly. You've got his courage. Chayton looked up, eyes squinting against the wind. You my father now too. 2 fathers. 1 sky. Jake felt something twist in his chest, a warmth that hurt. He put a rough hand on the boy's shoulder. Reckon that's the best thing I ever heard. They stood there for a while, snow swirling around them, until Jake spotted what he'd been waiting for, black specks moving across the far ridge. 6, maybe 7 riders. Time to go, he said. By dusk, the outlaws were close. Jake could hear the distant jingle of tack, the crackle of voices carried by the wind. Inside the cabin, Chayton sat by the fire, the shotgun across his lap. His eyes didn't show fear, just focus. Jake checked his rifle one last time. If they come in, you don't hesitate. You shoot straight, you shoot fast. Understand? Chayton nodded. Yes, Pa. That word, Pa, Hit harder than any bullet could. Jake swallowed, then nodded. Good boy. The first shot shattered the window. Glass sprayed like ice shards. Jake dropped to one knee, returning fire. The outlaws had spread out in a semicircle around the cabin, using rocks and snowbanks for cover. Bullets hissed through the air, thunking into the logs. The air filled with smoke and powder. Jake fired again and again, reloading with trembling fingers. Stay low, Chayton. The boy crawled across the floor, eyes sharp, and aimed the shotgun through a crack in the wall. He fired. One outlaw dropped. Jake grinned grimly. That's my boy. Then the front door burst inward, a man charging through the smoke, revolver raised. Jake spun and fired point-blank. The man crashed into the table, dead before he hit the floor. The smell of blood and smoke filled the room. 2 left, Jake hissed. Maybe 3. He peeked through the shattered window. 2 shadows moved near the barn, trying to flank them. Jake reloaded, motioned to Chayton. Come on. They slipped out the back, boots sinking deep. The cold hit them like a hammer, the night blazing white under the moon. Jake crept toward the barn, breath puffing in clouds. A voice echoed from the darkness. Rancher, you're a fool. Give us the kid and maybe we'll let you live. Jake's blood boiled. You'll get him over my dead body. That can be arranged. The crack of a rifle followed. Jake dove behind a snowbank, snow exploding where he'd stood. He returned fire. 1 outlaw dropped, screaming. The last man rushed forward, knife in hand, shouting curses. He was big, mean-looking, his face half covered by a torn scarf. Jake's rifle clicked empty. The man lunged. They crashed into the snow, rolling, fists and steel flashing. Jake's arm gave out from the old wound, the knife sliced close to his throat. Then Chayton's voice cut through the chaos, a cry so fierce it didn't sound like a boy's. The outlaw turned, just for a second. Bang. He fell back, the knife dropping from his hand, snow blooming red beneath him. Jake lay there, gasping, staring at the boy, small, trembling, the gun smoking in his hands. For a moment, neither spoke. The wind roared around them, carrying the sound of the dying man's last breath away into the night. Then Jake sat up slowly, wincing. You okay? Chayton nodded faintly. I shoot true. Jake smiled weakly. You sure did. He looked at the bodies around them, at the snow already covering their sins. Then he looked back at Chayton, that little boy from the mountains, now standing tall in the moonlight, his breath steady. Your father'd be proud, Jake said again, voice rough. So am I. They buried the men come morning. No prayers, no markers, just frozen dirt and silence. Jake's hands shook from cold and pain, but Chayton worked beside him, wordless, strong. When it was done, Jake leaned on his shovel and stared at the horizon. That's the last of it, he said softly. No more running. No more blood. Chayton looked up at him. Now we live. Jake nodded. Now we live. The boy took the small bone feather from his pouch and tied it to Jake's rifle strap. Spirit of my father. He protect us both. Jake blinked hard, feeling the sting behind his eyes. Thank you, son. The weeks that followed were quiet. The snow began to melt, revealing brown grass beneath. The horses grew restless again, the streams came alive with ice-cold water, and spring finally whispered through the pines. Jake's arm healed slow, leaving a scar like a pale rope down his forearm. Chayton grew taller, his hair longer, his words sharper. One evening, as the sun set red over the plains, Jake sat on the porch, sipping coffee, while Chayton whittled a stick beside him. The land glowed in gold light, stretching endless. You ever think about leavin' here someday? Jake asked. Chayton shook his head. This my home. You my family. Jake smiled softly. You got that right. The boy paused, then asked, Pa, you think I'm Apache or rancher? Jake thought for a long while, watching the sky fade into stars. You're both, son. And that's what makes you strong. The West don't care where you come from, just who you become. Chayton smiled, carving the stick into the shape of a bird. Then I become Hawk. Jake laughed. Yeah, that suits you just fine. The fire crackled behind them, and the mountains watched in silence. The land that had once taken so much now gave them peace. Years later, folks in town would talk about Jake Hollister and his Apache boy. Some called them ghosts, others heroes. Most just said they were family, two souls bound by a promise made in the snow. And when Jake grew old, and the winters grew kinder, the story of that night, of blood and fire and a dying father's last wish, lived on through Chayton's hands. He never forgot the words his real father spoke, "Make him man." But he also never forgot what Jake taught him, that family isn't blood. It's who stands beside you when the wind howls and the cold tries to take everything. And so, when the first snow of every winter fell, Chayton would step outside the cabin, lift his face to the storm, and whisper in both tongues, Apache and English, the same vow his father once gave to a stranger. Family, always.